This is the second video in a series to help you review rhetorical devices that you might come across in the material you read or the speeches you listen to. Specifically, these are meant to help with questions that you might encounter on the AP Language multiple choice section, because some of the questions get really specific about rhetorical devices, and you also have to write a rhetorical analysis essay. Spoiler alert for the exam, I know. So remember, just knowing and identifying a bunch of rhetorical devices is not going to earn you a passing grade. You don't want to just list rhetorical devices in that essay. You have to know the author's purpose in a passage and talk about how some of the rhetorical devices being used help that author achieve that purpose. You can still get a good grade without specifically naming a bunch of rhetorical devices if you understand what a rhetorical device does, even if you can't actually remember the name of the device itself. But at the very least, these lists are going to give you an idea of the uses and functions of a lot of rhetorical devices, so that you're going to start to read a passage and you can see how the author is using the language to convincingly argue a point. So there are a lot of terms, and what I did was to group them around common functions to hopefully make a little more sense of how they are used rhetorically. I'm calling list 2, it stands to reason, because this list talks through a lot of the rhetorical devices that are used to kind of construct an argument or logically reason out an argument. This particular list is large, so I divided it into 2 videos. This is video part 1. So the first word in it stands to reason is 11 in our total. Argumentation. We need to start with a broad term that's kind of a catch-all, but it's the basis of a lot of what happens in the AP Language exam. So argumentation is working through a problem by looking at all sides of it. It's persuasion through logic and reason. We go through a process of making claims, giving evidence to back up or substantiate those claims, and then analyze how the evidence proves that claim. So in the rhetorical analysis, argument, and synthesis essays on the AP exam, your ability to make an argument is being examined, and in many of the multiple choice questions, your ability to examine how others use argumentation is being evaluated. So that's argumentation. So number 12 is appeals, and we have to talk through the appeals. I assume that there's been a lot of teaching and discussion about the appeals of argument in your classes, because these are kind of cornerstones of what happens in persuasive writing, right? These have been called modes of persuasion, ethical strategies, and rhetorical appeals. You might have heard them labeled any of those things. You're going to sometimes see these in the rhetorical triangle connected with the author, purpose, and audience. So if you haven't seen the rhetorical triangle, stop the video and Google it really quick, then come back. But these 3 appeals are how an author can reach or affect an audience. They are not always in balance, but they kind of depend on the diction an author uses, the evidence an author brings into the text, and the way the author discusses and evaluates the evidence. We're going to talk about 3 appeals right here. Right? Ethos or ethos, really depending on your teacher, is about an author establishing trust with the audience and calling up the principles or beliefs and morals of the audience itself, right? If the audience feels the author is on the side of right and justice, readers are going to align themselves with the author. So several factors can impact the ethos of an author. If an author is known by an audience, they trust them already, ethos may be already established. Whether an audience is open to a topic or hostile to a topic, and how the author then approaches that topic is either going to establish or undermine the ethos. So tone, how the argument is structured, the number of facts versus the amount of commentary can all weigh in as to how trustworthy an author appears to the audience. Logos or logos, again, depending on how your teacher pronounces it, is about the logic and reasoning in a piece. We mostly connect this with the evidence selection in a passage, and how that evidence is presented. So when you talk about the logos of a work, the reference is usually to a concrete detail or piece of evidence that the author has introduced. If there's little evidence or weak evidence in a piece, the author is probably either counting on established ethos with the audience or is perhaps making like an impassioned plea, an emotional appeal, and relying therefore on pathos, which we're talking about next. Pathos or pathos is how an author is appealing to an audience's emotions. There are many ways and rhetorical devices an author can employ to affect an audience's emotions. So word choice plays a role because some words carry more emotion than others. You think of the difference between a group and a gang. Both are people connected together, but they have different weights and feelings and emotions to that. So a personal or touching example is going to carry more emotional weight than a bunch of statistics, right? The better an author knows the audience, the better he or she can pull on the heartstrings to argue a point. So conversely, right, some audiences are going to be more skeptical or suspicious of a pathos-based argument if they don't like the topic or they're against the topic already. So an author does have to know the audience in order to decide how much emotion do I want to connect with this argument. So the next one, number 13, is structure. We have to talk about structure because every piece of writing has some sort of organization or arrangement of the various elements in a work, and we just want to keep in mind that an author does intentionally choose how to put together an argument, and so the choice of structure, right, it can help the author achieve his or her purpose. A narrative structure is like a chronological organization used to convey a story. Narrative structures can be very straightforward and matter of fact if an author just needs to retell events. But depending on the information being communicated, right, a narrative chronological structure can build the drama and the anticipation and the feeling within a piece of writing as well. The dramatic structure is an organization like it's used in plays, right, consisting of a series of scenes with each one being powerfully detailed. So an author might use a dramatic structure to draw a reader in to bring a lot of emotion and feeling into the argument. And then discursive structure is what we're most familiar with when we think of the organization used in an argument or essay. You know, it has an intro, has body paragraphs that kind of logically lay out the issue or argument, and a conclusion. So the general consensus is that discursive essays try to be more balanced and removed from taking a side than the more typical argument essay, where the side the author is on is much clearer, but the structure of the two is quite similar. It's just the content that might vary. All right, number 14, thesis. Now, it might seem basic or out of place to put thesis in a rhetorical device review, but if you consider the definition of rhetorical device, which is the use of words in a certain way to convey meaning or to persuade, right? A thesis is where the author is telling us exactly what he or she is hoping to convince us of. So at this point in the game, you know what a thesis is and does, but when you think about that in a rhetorical analysis essay, your thesis has to identify the author's purpose and the audience. You're going to need to identify the thesis or main claim in the articles that you read so that you're able to write your own thesis in that essay. Apophasis. This is an interesting rhetorical device because it draws attention or emphasis to something by pretending to downplay or ignore or not want to talk about it, right? It can be used validly or harshly. By using it, an author can call attention to something while seeming to be detached and not really caring or just not wanting to go there. So imagine an author saying, this is not the time or place to mention, and then including some details that are sensitive or a situation that kind of actually contributes to the argument. There's some irony to it because the author is claiming not meaning to give that information that they're actually giving. A great example actually is in the play The Tragedy of Julius Caesar, where Mark Antony, when he's trying to talk to the Roman people, pulls out Caesar's will, and then he says, "But pardon me, I did not, mean to mention it." And then he hides it again. Of course, the whole point was to get the people interested in hearing the will, and they actually do want to hear the will. So apophasis is kind of I wouldn't say necessarily a trick, but it's a way to bring up something and then pretend like you didn't want to bring it up. Number 16 is causal relationship. And causal relationship is when one thing results from another. Right? Something is causing an effect or a result. You could also call this like a cause-effect relationship or just cause-effect. If there's a direct connection that helps an author's argument, you can bet it's going to be mentioned. What better way to give a warning or an encouragement or a direction for people to follow, right? If an author's trying to warn the audience about something, he will bring in or she will bring in examples that show the negative results of not believing him or her or not listening to the argument. It works the same way if there's a benefit. If the author's advice or directions are followed and something positive will result, they will want to bring it up. If we listen, right, good things could happen. The words if and then may be used to be really obvious. If this happens, then you will see this, or this results in that. But these words are not necessary to discuss causal relationships. It's enough to just give an incident or an event or an idea, and then give the follow-through or what happens if that idea is followed. Hopefully that makes sense. So that is part 1 of list 2, it stands to reason. To understand the rest of the rhetorical devices in this list, please look in the playlist for It Stands to Reason Part 2. Thank you for watching. I would love for you to subscribe to the channel. Here are the rest of the playlists of the rhetorical analysis words. Up here, right, is some writing workshops and maybe another little fun thing you wouldn't mind checking out. We'll see you on the next video.